Hello, welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Loffers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. You may also know me as the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, bi-weekly newsletter, website, quarterly magazine. And I'm also the architect of the IT Survey Map, and we have also a sister version that's a consultancy survey map. So welcome to this live webinar. We have a whole hour talking about end-to-end supply chain visibility, control, and logistic outsourcing. And I have done an extensive study together with an expert among this field, and they are live in this audience. So next to me is Patrick Haaks. Patrick, welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning. Happy to be here, Martijn. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks to be, to the audience to be and sharing thoughts and ideas. So thank you.
And next to Patrick, I have also Carlo Peters. Carlo, welcome.
Hi, Martijn. Welcome as well, and thank you for having me here in this webinar.
Just like I mentioned, Supply Chain Media has done an extensive survey with BCI, or also known as Book Consultants International. So we will talk about it extensively in the next hour. Some practical stuff. This webinar will be recorded and will be made available on YouTube within 48 hours. But bear with us because we have an interesting story. And the PDF will also be made available to the audience. So that's one thing you should know. You could interact with us. You can ask questions to Patrick and Carlo. There are two ways to interact with us. There's a chat functionality on the right-hand side that's open right now. But there's also down below the questions functionality. You see the round-shaped text bubbles. So if you have questions to Patrick or Carlo, please ask them via the questions functionality, the Q&A functionality. You can even vote on the questions. If those questions are in line of the conversation I will be having, I will ask these questions right away. If not, I will reserve these questions to the Q&A at the end. All right. So next, we'll have after this webinar, we have also an after talk. So after the whole hour, 5 o'clock CET, we will sit down in the virtual lounge, and you can talk to Carlo and Patrick directly, and you will could join us in the lounge. I will put up my camera so you can enlarge your screen and you have a better view on the slides. All right. So what has happened in the world? Well, we have seen it all in the last 4 years. A lot of black swans, COVID, war in Ukraine, the conflict in Gaza, CSRD. You can see it right here, all leading to lockdown, shortages, bullwhips, even recession and inflation and costs. It's all related here, as you can see. And based on that, there's a lot of turmoil in the world, and that has an impact on supply chains. And that's also the reason why BCI Global and Supply Chain Media did a survey last year. Last year, we did a survey about reshoring, leading to decentralization and decarbonization. So we'll discuss it briefly. What about BCI Global? BCI Global is a consultancy firm, and Patrick will explain it in depth before we go into the subject matter. So this is what we do at Supply Chain Media. We create software maps. We do this for IT vendors, supply chain software vendors, the IT software map, well known. This is also a version about supply chain consulting firms in Europe with all kind of service line. Yes, and of course, Book Consultants International is also there because they have a lot of service line related to supply chain consulting. But maybe Patrick, you can briefly explain a bit more about BCI Global.
Yeah, I'll do that. And thanks, Martijn. And again, happy to be here with the audience. And perhaps to kind of pick in before I talk a little bit on BCI is on your ripple effect. I think important here is turbulence is not over. And if you look at the survey we did last year, after COVID, a lot of companies were looking at post-COVID, but also to de-risk on China. Hey, should we shortening our supply chains, yes or not? And as you can see from the research we did together with Martijn Loffers last year, some companies really have made strides in that effort to really kind of decentralize their supply chains. So meaning, source in region, make in region, distribute and sell in region. But quite some companies still have complex global supply chains. And that's also the reason why Martijn and I said earlier this year, is like, hey, if you think about what's happening in the world, and if you think about what's happening in the Middle East, or if you think about, port strikes, if you think about the routing of the Cape versus the Suez, a lot of aspects that are happening as we speak. Is like, hey, if you need to make a decision on complex global supply chains, do you have the right tooling in place versus having a short supply chain? What's the state of the, let's say, what's the state of the art on and the adoption of end-to-end visibility? And have we now seen huge strides forward in that regard? And that's the reason why we wanted to do this survey, to answer like, hey, it's great that people are looking for resilience, but why is the adoption rate for end-to-end visibility perhaps lower than one would think? And why is that? And what are the barriers? And how does it tie into outsourcing or insourcing? So that's a little bit of the background of the survey. And with that, just a kind of a 1 minute spiel here on BCI Global. So I'm heading up the global supply chain practice at BCI Global. We are a specialized consulting and implementation firm. We are going to celebrate our 40th anniversary next year with, as you can see, a global footprint in Asia, as well as in Europe, as well as in the US. And we really specialize in helping companies in terms of making footprint decisions. So whether that's linked to the sourcing, whether that's linked to the manufacturing or the distribution network, the operating model in terms of, hey, what's the right governance? Should you insource, should you outsource? Do you also have the right transportation and logistics network in place? How do you get the right visibility in your network? And do you really need visibility? And last but not least, how do you make that stick and implement that at the end of the day? We're very proud that we have been nominated by Forbes magazine for the 4th time in a row as one of the best consulting firms. So that's a little bit of who we are as a company. And of course, Carlo and I are happy to talk with you offline more on what we do for a living. But the real hour is on sharing the results of the survey. So that's a little bit of who we are. If you look at the survey itself, important here, right? So we interviewed or we asked questions to more than 120 executives in the supply chain domain, which is a great number, with the majority, as you can see on the right top corner, global responsibilities in various type of industry verticals. So that's medtech, pharma, to high-tech electronics, et cetera. And those companies that fill out the survey are basically constitutes of, I would say, large multinational companies to mid-sized multinational companies. And we also asked them like, hey, what kind of setup do you have? So have you a setup where you say, hey, we source locally and we make locally and we distribute locally, or do you really have still a global footprint in place? And what you can see here is that 70% of the companies really has some degree still of lengthy, complex global supply chain. And for me, the reason why I make this analogy is, perhaps everybody here in the call has a driver's license, right? So if you reach a certain age and you want to move away from your bicycle or your scooter to the car, you need to have a license. And I always make the analogy, if you have complex global supply chains that span the globe with a lot of turbulence, why don't you have a license? And in this case, visibility could be the license as a level or a ticket to play in order to manage your supply chain. So that's something as a hypothesis I would like to throw in today to see also what's the response from the audience in that regards.
My first feedback on your analogy is, can you use your driver's license all around the world, or is it applicable only in certain regions? But that's a sidestep. Anyway,
let's talk about it in a minute. Yeah, that's a fair point, Martijn. Yeah.
So could you explain what are the main drivers for supply chain visibility according to the audience we surveyed?
Yeah, I think important here, right? It's like, the question we always ask ourselves here is like, hey, what's the driver? So is this a cost play? Is this a service play? So meaning making sure you have more reliable lead times in order to have higher OTIF levels, on time and full levels to the customer, or is this more like a capability play? And I think, if you ask that question, you get different answers, as you can see on the slide here. But the message here is that, it's really a capability and a service level play, but there's a big but. It only flies if you're able to generate the savings. So this is an important one. So, yes, everybody wants this like a kid in the candy shop, right? So ideally you want to have this capability and this license, and that, people see the service level benefits, But if you don't are able to sell this internally with savings in terms of to justify the investment, it's going to be tough to get this in place. And then if you look into, what are the drivers for executives to kind of embark upon such a journey for end-to-end visibility control, it's really linked to what Martijn was alluding towards in the beginning. It's like, how do we increase our resilience level? How do we reduce or de-risk our supply chain? How do we maintain our service levels? How do we reduce our costs, our OPEX? But I always tell people, like, visibility is great, but in a perfect world, and of course we don't live in a perfect world. In a perfect world, visibility is nice, but it doesn't tell you much, right? So ultimately, this needs to tie into better and faster decision making in terms of steering your supply chain and your supply chain performance. Yeah, so that's the number 4. It's enabling better and faster decision making. So a little bit of the main drivers why companies are considering this, on top of all of the turmoil, Martijn, that you were alluding to at the beginning.
But the main thing is what surprised me a bit is that cost is not on top of their agenda regarding this. Because of inflation, that's paramount. But they are aware there's something more than cost. That's good to mention here.
Yeah, I think this also ties a little bit on the aspiration level. Some people like to call it that we need to have this license to drive, because we have a complex supply chain, and service always sticks. So that's also an important one. But I said to you and the audience, like, there's a big but. If you are not able to justify any bottom line benefits, this might be a hard one to sell internally. So that's the caveat here.
And there was a lot of talk about visibility, especially in the first year of COVID, and I also made a mention, there's a difference between operational, tactical, and strategic visibility, upstream and downstream, or inbound and outbound. Maybe you can explain a bit more how you position the supply chain visibility and control.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if you ask the audience here in the session, so if you ask 10 people, you also get most likely 9 or 10 different viewpoints on, what is end-to-end visibility control. So from our angle, there's a lot of companies that talk, or executives that talk about more like the area in terms of transportation management. So we call it the world of physical transportation logistics. So everything that moves in terms of getting visibility on that angle. So whether that's transportation, or whether that's ocean, air freight, parcels, what have you. It's also the pick, pack, and ship. So it's more like there's a big push from that angle, and especially if you have sourcing in the Far East and you have customers in the Western world, for instance. That's how do you deal with ETA predictability, very much linked to, I would say, the transportation and logistics side. And on the other hand, you have, I would call it more like the world of the planning hubs, where you want to make sure you do your proper demand sensing, you want to do your demand planning, forecasting. Do you have the right inventory levels and the right deployment in place to fulfill demand? Can you steer also your suppliers, and do you have access to their capacities, etc.? So that's more on the, I would say, the supply chain world of planning. And then ultimately, you can also think about, if you think about a command center, and this might be a little bit of the myth that we want to unravel here, is like a end-to-end visibility, where people combine the world of physical logistics and transport with the world of supply chain planning. Imagine a command center with screens where you have basically everything at your fingertips. That also could be the stepping stone towards the other myth that people are talking about, or the aspiration level on digitization and digital twins, but more like really having a central hub or decentral hubs where people are sitting with systems to really steer and control your supply chain. And important here is about the proactiveness in that regard. So because if you have visibility but you can't steer, it doesn't help you to make better decisions. So that's kind of the third level. And what I've tried here is to basically plot, in a different kind of services and different kind of companies, in what's typically a development path of companies and where they are sitting. And if I look at the survey and look at our companies and clients we work with, you see that the industry is still much more on the left bottom corner. So a lot of companies are still in the transportation or logistics services play. So really having visibility on that angle. And you see some companies moving much more to the right, typically high-tech companies or companies that might be a little bit more mature, or companies that are very much in a regulated industry. So think about pharmaceutical industry, which was already 10 years ago doing temp logging and tracing and all of those kind of elements because of the closed loop and the control and the cold chain that they had to manage. So you see that, towards the aspiration of command and control center, the majority of the companies are pretty much on the journey in terms of, moving from transportation logistics towards a next step in their let's say, level of maturity of really integrating that. So the adoption of end-to-end visibility to that extent has been moderate. You would expect that if you think about, in the time of COVID, everybody was jumping on this. Now we're already a few years later, and turmoil has not disappeared. But if you can't sell this in the time of COVID, why should you be able to embark upon this journey now?
Good point. When I look, I see, for example, in Unilever, and I know Unilever quite well. So 10 years ago, they had different control towers. They had a separate control tower than in Schaffhausen for procurement. They still have a logistic control tower in Katowice. And so you were still siloed control towers. And you see the command center phrase, and that's been coined by Gartner, I think, last year. And that should be the overall integrated control tower with plan, source, make, and deliver all integrated. But that's still for most companies far away. But that will change, hopefully. And maybe you can tell about the visibility part now and in the future, because we in the survey we surveyed about what's the status now and what's your aspiration level in the future in 2027.
Yeah, so if we do a sanity check level in terms of, hey, what's the temperature in the bathtub? So if you look at the more than 123 people we surveyed, like, only 30% has really end-to-end visibility in place today. So that's 30%. Whereas the aspiration level, we kind of use the word aspiration level, is that, almost 70% of those companies, they want to have end-to-end orchestration in place by 2027. And mind you, that's only less than 3 years away from now. So it's quite a big step and aspiration level of companies that want to have that in place. And we're going to talk about the barriers in a minute. And if you look at the companies that that don't have the end-to-end visibility in place, so that's the 70% today. You see that some companies have explored. They have downstream visibility with some of the, let's say, the visibility platforms, or they might have some upstream visibility. But truly having end-to-end visibility is only limited to 30%. And of course, you need to ask yourself, like, hey, do I need to have really end-to-end visibility, or is partial visibility enough for my company? So that's also where we need to kind of peel the onion a bit in terms of, hey, what is best for companies in that regard?
A bit sidestepping, for a lot of companies, CSRD is a black swan. Why? Because they are not publicly traded and think, I'm not impacted by CSRD. But, mind you, 55,000 companies in Europe will be or are impacted by CSRD. Why? Because they are a tier 1 supplier to a publicly traded company, or tier 2. So I think the CSRD will trigger a lot. So yes, end-to-end supply chain visibility, where's my raw materials, parts coming from, that will put something in place, and it will trigger something, and we'll see it later on. So I think, yeah.
But it's so interesting, Martijn. If you look at, we live in an age, it's 2024. We have AI now. If you look at connectivity and use of technology, especially also with the youngsters, still odd that even several years after COVID, we don't have the information at our fingertips to talk about end-to-end supply chain management, right?
No, that's and that will change. I'm following AI and the developments with the new generation of Copilot and JetGPT closely, and that's amazing. So we ain't seen nothing yet, but until now, it's still far away. But maybe you can talk about what's lacking and what's causing this trouble.
Yeah. So and I think there are 3 key takeaways we can take from the survey. And what are the barriers for not realizing a higher percentage of adoption? So the 3, I think, key elements here. One is, we call it the IT jigsaw. So in terms of and here the message is, not size matters, but legacy matters. Is if you look at companies that might have a history of 50 years or even longer, they have done acquisitions, they have different kind of ERP systems, they haven't harmonized their systems, their master data. So then it's going to be very hard, to really kind of push the shovel and have end-to-end visibility. Whereas companies that have, been in existence perhaps only 15 years, which come from a digital background, have much more standardized and much more modern technology in place. So, solving this IT jigsaw is a key element in that regards, with the key related IT issues there. So quality of master data. I think, master data management is not sexy, but companies that are multinational companies, I think if you ask them honestly, like, hey, on a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rank your master data? That's of course an important element if you think about end-to-end visibility. If you think about, the whole ocean routing from Asia through the Cape or through the Suez Canal, and people that did not kind of update their master data on inbound lead time, well, then you can think about strong end-to-end visibility concepts. But if the master data is not populated right, then you're still going to hurt yourself dramatically. So solving the IT jigsaw is a huge element, and also picking the right technology. That is one element here. The other element is the complexity of IT implementation. A lot of our clients are looking into, SAP HANA implementation. So that takes a lot of, kind of resources, IT resource, a lot of budget also away, and sometimes even with some frustration at the end. So IT implementation management is a key one. And the third one, and I will allude to that later, is, how can you best sell this internally? Because it's a capability play, it's a service play, but it only flies if you also kind of monetize the business case here. So those are the three key reasons why adoption to date, or the barriers, are basically still in place.
You triggered me about AI. I think that master data and about product data and what kind of lead times are in your ERP system. I think that AI will solve a lot of these problems. Could possibly solve all this. We have seen it with robotic process automation. So I think that will change. But still, master data is paramount and important. But I think that AI could play a role in that sense. Making sense of different kind of product data, connotation between sister companies and that kind of stuff. So that will help.
Yep.
Moving forward to the actual survey, what do you think are the main capabilities? What's needed in supply chain visibility?
So we asked the audience, or the participants, like, if you look at what kind of capabilities are you looking for today version 2027, to understand, like, hey, what are the key areas of development or evolution? And the graph here really kind of points it out nicely. So you see on the bottom part, the need for transportation cost analysis really drops, but that's not because it drops, because it's more in favor of other elements kind of picking up to a more extreme level. Is really having the ability to have end-to-end orchestration, so to orchestrate end-to-end in making the right decisions for your company and your supply chain. It's demand sensing, so making sure, like, hey, what kind of pulls in the market, what is the demand pattern, what is the order pattern, how can you steer according to potential demand and forecast in a better way and deploy your inventory in a better way. It's about backwards integration in terms of capacity review of your supplier. So how do you make sure that, upstream you have a better visibility in terms of raw materials, semi-finished goods, but also capacities at your supplier level, as well as, and I think this is really kind of ties in nicely to your CSRD remark earlier, how do we make sure that we are able to, with a few buttons, can report on the CO2 reporting, whether that's carbon accounting or different ways of CSRD reporting. But that really kind of is a capability that companies are looking for in the next few years.
Yeah, and down below, automatic freight bill audit is of essence, but these are minor increases. The same with SNOP and the shipment optimization. Yeah, interesting to see. And if you relate it to the current situation and the aspirational level, what do you think as the benefits of all this?
Yeah, I think what when we talk about the benefits, and if you look into, I showed a few minutes ago earlier, like the 2x2 matrix of end-to-end visibility. What you really see is that, the world of transportation, where you see the transportation cost savings, generic carrier selection, freight order and pay, transportation optimization, all good stuff, right? But that might be more like where we're coming from the past. But what companies are really looking for from an aspirational level is, how do we optimize the end-to-end network? How do we move away from a silo organization towards a a holistic organizations? How can we streamline the organization? How can we make sure we, as supply chain practitioners, support reducing carbon footprint? How do we make sure that we make better decisions? So proactive event management. So if something happens, or if you think something will happen, how can you anticipate? So the anticipation piece and the proactiveness is usually important here. And then we get into elements like process automations. How can we make sure that if you think about moving into that world of a command center, how we can make sure that we can automate certain things instead of, especially with the labor shortages we see across the globe, that we can automate because of the benefits of reducing the labor force, or really using the people that we have for other tasks. And given the fact that interest rates have been on the rise for the last 18 months, how can we also make sure that we can reduce inventory in the chain? Yeah, so those are really, I would say, the developments in expected benefits if you move towards the world of end-to-end.
Regarding the last point of inventory reduction, of course, we all want, especially the CFOs, want a lower working capital. I had a webinar with Heineken earlier this year, and they are now able, because they have breweries around the world, that to have a better overview what is needed, say in Italy, and what is available as capacity in Spain. So you see more like also allocation of inventory across your network, also capacity usage across your network, especially when you are like a multinational like Heineken with different kind of breweries all around the world. So that's also something to explain. So that not so much inventory reduction in one single warehouse, but more in your whole network.
Absolutely, it really should be network related. I like to talk about deployment of inventory and how do you make sure you have that at your fingertips and can play with that to ultimately serve your customers.
Yeah, and on the technology side, there's also been talking about multi-echelon inventory optimization and allocation, that kind of stuff. In that area, we are talking about to address this topic. Yeah, so we talk about visibility, but also we talk about outsourcing. Could you tell a bit more about what are the criteria to choose solutions or partners in this area?
No, so I think if you look at if we go back in time a bit, in the past, a lot of companies are looking at insourcing versus outsourcing. As if you think about the world of, in this case, control towers, or let's say command center hubs, whatever you want to call it. It's like, a lot of people are looking at people, technology, and processes. And then, it was either doing it yourselves, like with the likes of Unilever or, Philips that has various control towers, or the ABBs of this world. So companies that had already a large scale, they in the past, implemented their own organization processes and, implemented IT to manage that and create that visibility. And sometimes it was end-to-end, sometimes it was more partial. And you had on the right-hand side here, the outsourced world, where you would outsource either to a 4PL, a four-party logistics provider, or a BPO provider like Accenture or Central Station or C.H. Robinson, or even if you would think about Flexport and a digital platform and that like. But what you see is that there's more that meets the eye than just the insourced or the outsourced operating model. What we see is that, if you insource, of course, you need to have certain scale and you have the right tools and you need to invest in that. If you outsource, of course, you can get the leverage of much more plug and play and leverage somebody else's capabilities. What you see is that, the hybrid solutions, we call it, is where companies are looking either to, get control of their data, get control over the technology, but use an outsourcing provider to kind of provide, let's say, the labor management or the processing power. So you see different kind of hybrid solutions. And interesting enough is from the survey is that the degree of, we ask people like, hey, how do you see the operating model going to continue going forward? Is that insourcing is pretty much flat. We don't see a huge increase there, but hybrid is really picking up in terms of getting control and because it's much more scalable in that regard, you can easier implement. But on the other hand, you're also going to be much more control of your data and IP. And you also see, to a lesser extent, a higher degree of outsourcing rather than insourcing of these kind of setups.
If you look at the right-hand side with the outsourced variant, the global 4PL, I think, a lot of bigger 3PL companies like Kuehne+Nagel, DHL coined and pitched that they also could do a 4PL, but then you have some issues, maybe if they are not impartial enough. In the end, 4PL in an assetless or asset light environment hasn't really flying in the last 10 years, or do you see it differently?
I think you're correct. There's always a market for service in that regard. So if you think about the quadrant, the 2x2 quadrant on the right bottom corner, that's where in the world of transportation logistics that could work. And you see that, for instance, in the pharmaceutical industry, where some of the players you just mentioned are managing the transportation flows. But here, if you think about end-to-end visibility and you want to also do better planning, better demand planning, inventory allocation, you want to be in control of the data, then you also need to think about, how much do you want to outsource, or where do you want to have your data sitting, and what kind of decisions you want to make. So if you really want to make the step towards really end-to-end, I see the majority of the companies gravitating more towards a hybrid solution, really than I would say the classical outsourcing solution.
Okay, makes sense. So maybe you can highlight a bit about the different criteria between the insourcing strategy and the outsourcing strategy.
Yeah, this is more like selection criteria. So if you want to move either from procuring or selecting technology versus going to an outsourcing model, there's a lot of different things listed here. I don't want to go to all of them, but highlighting a few key ones. If you're looking for technology, what's really important as a piece of advice, everybody's like, do a proper scoping. I was making the analogy of a kid in the candy store, right? There's a lot of different tools out there. If you think about cognitive learning, if you think about ETA visibility, if you think about, what is the real scope that you want to get out of this? Because otherwise you're going to be boarding the ocean. So what is the real scope that you're looking for is really important on technology, and make sure that you hone in on that and that you don't make it too complex. And the other one there is about integration. So integration capabilities with other platforms, with other providers. That's really, I would say, the two differentiators on the technology side that I would people spend more time and effort on. And on the right-hand side is about, if you move to an outsourcing strategy, and if you would go to the world of 4PL, as Martijn alluded earlier, it's about how do you deal with your independence and how do you deal with, your transferability and technology ownership. So make sure you have I would call it transferability. So if you would like to insource this over time or go to a hybrid, that you have that in place. So you're not kind of stuck with a solution that you can't integrate in the future. So flexibility in that regard is going to be key.
So,
and of course, we can help you with that, but that's a clear one.
Another thing, I had a conversation with the VP supply chain of one of the most well-known manufacturers in parts for bikes, and basically he mentioned we have different kind of supply chains, and some supply chains are handled by different partners. So that's also something. Could you differentiate your supply chains, product groups, or can you harmonize them? So that's also a very important thing. So one supply chain doesn't fit all. So that is also in a sense.
Correct. And I mentioned earlier, Martijn's like, hey, there's a few barriers. So one of the barriers is also selling the business case. So perhaps we can talk a bit on what's important if you want to think about a business case. So really, savings are clear, and they can be the majority of savings typically can be found on the transportation domain. That's why a lot of people are looking into that. And then the proactiveness really kind of jumps out in terms of, hey, how can you steer and make better decisions, as well as reduction of inventory. So those are key elements in terms of selling a business case for senior management. And we also put in some of the BCI experience in terms of what are the things
before you go there, one thing, what I experienced talking to supply chain executives, they have a harder time to sell any project to the CFO compared to marketing and sales and AI, IT. But the trick word is, to the CFO, I could pitch you any supply chain project and you say, I can save you, say, 100 million on working capital, then a CFO will listen. Or make it 10 million, what makes sense in your world. But, talk about, I can save you 100 million working capital, and I've seen these projects, and then the CFO will listen. So these, and probably you will need the three mentioned parts at the top here. But that's the magic word. Save 100 million working capital, and you get your budget for a project. That's my case.
Yeah, correct. No, you're spot on. So we've listed here a few elements on the right part of the screen.
Yep.
Like what are the things you can look at? And those are experiences from our end. So we help a lot of companies, to assess the business case and, where should you look for visibility and whatnot. And is end-to-end the right play, or should you look in different areas? And how can you quantify those areas? And you see different elements. So you see some operational stuff like invoice matching is a quick one that one can do, or dynamic carrier selection. That's really on the transportation side. You can look at mode, you can look at consolidation, deconsolidation, all of good stuff. And then you also have, really the more strategic elements in terms of where you can push the button. But ultimately, you need to make sure that you're able to, put that business case in front of your CFO, say, this is why we want to do it and why we want to do it now. Or unless there is a crisis, that's a different starting point. But then really in order to sell this in the world of post-COVID.
So one thing, I read the Dutch financial paper this morning, and there's a Benelux bus manufacturing Ebusco, and they are on the brink of bankruptcy. But basically, the cause of all this is upstream supply chain visibility, because they couldn't predict when they would get the parts, etc., and would be able to produce their buses, electric buses. And basically, some customer canceled their orders because the promises were not met. So basically, Ebusco is on the brink of bankruptcy because of upstream lack of supply chain visibility, and that's that could be handled differently if they have done it right. And maybe what will help to sell this to make this work, and
Yeah, I think important here if you want to talk about in terms of key success factors for implementation. So we asked the participants on what's really important. I think it doesn't surprise that senior management involvement kind of really kicks in here. And if I look at companies that have the top-notch kind of end-to-end visibility, they also have strong supply chain leadership that is driving a capability play. Because if you only look at the cost part, that's one side of the story, but you also need to have a visionary, that's able to put a North Star in place and communicates that throughout the organization. So senior management involvement is crucial. But it doesn't fly if you have a very complex IT landscape and you need to spend a ton of money in integrating that and with interfaces and make it very complex. Integration and the ability to integrate in the current IT landscape. And again, I know that a lot of companies are moving away from SAP to HANA. So I think that will also push the adoption in 3-4 years time to a higher level of some of these solutions. Those are really important areas in terms of critical success factors.
But if you look at the lower end, selection of the right outsourcing partner is not scoring that high. So that's in the 3PL world. That's not the key success factor now. Do you think?
According to the survey, that is correct. I think I think a lot of buzzwords here is like we have a lot of turmoil. Perhaps even more turmoil is coming. Right? We don't know how the U.S. election is going to play out. What does that do on import duties, and how perhaps trade wars will be starting or not, and how we deal with global trade management. The other day is like the more complexity and dynamics you have, you need to have infrastructure and tools in place to manage that differently. And I think that's where ultimately senior management needs to see that. But it is also, I've seen on our practice, like companies having a control tower that was just kind of operating with telephones and Microsoft Excel spreadsheets, right? That's a different level of digitized world in terms of creating end-to-end visibility. So I think there's also a communication message on what is really out there and what can you achieve. So to educate not only the supply chain community but also senior management on what you can achieve if you want to invest in those kind of processes, tools, and solutions.
Maybe you can address briefly what the roadmap should look like.
Yeah, so I think important here is scoping. So how do you start? What do you want to accomplish? Yes, end-to-end is great, but how do you start, right? So is it because if you have if you look at our clients and if you have 100 manufacturing sites and you have a lot of customers and a lot of suppliers, you can't go all in day one, right? So how do you scope? How can you make sure that you have the data and the master data in the right place? You can develop the business case. How can you pilot? So in order to kind of make sure that you convince senior management, but you also can scale. So it's really about getting that, proof of concept done in order to scale up and do the proper rollout in the next sequence. So this is not like something that you can do in a 2 or 3 months time frame. So you need to kind of plan properly depending on your complexity and your ambition level. So these ingredients here can help people to say, okay, but how do we slice the elephant into pieces, and how do we make sure that we can demonstrate to the business on why this should be a priority, how this can help them, and then do a proper proof of concept and scale up.
So thanks. We talked a lot about visibility. Next, we're going to talk about outsourcing. So, Carlo, could you and we did some questions in the survey. Can you tell us a bit more about the key drivers on the outsourcing part?
Sure, I can. So indeed, the second topic in this survey was about outsourcing, and I mean key drivers for outsourcing, and I think that's not a surprise. That's about cost savings and focus on core businesses. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are other topics as well, things like getting operational flexibility in order to be able to manage peak seasons or low seasons, but also certainly, let's say, long-term scalability in order to be able to grow the business, or if there is a decline, that you have a flexible solution in place in order to manage your warehouse and transportation operations.
And we also asked the respondents, the supply chain executive, about their outlook today and outlook in 2027. Can you explain what kind of shifts we are seeing?
Yeah, and that is where it becomes interesting here. So let's say the aspiration for 2027 is to move away from, let's say, rather operational and transactional relationships, way more into strategic relationships. And that is a significant change, significant move in, let's say, a real short period of time. And of course, this is an aspiration level. We don't know what's really going to happen, but it means something. It means something that companies are more looking towards a solution where they have a value-based solution, a value-based arrangement, instead of something like an operational solution based purely on pricing. Mm-hmm. So that has a lot of impact to both 3PLs and 4PLs eventually, but also on shippers and brand owners in how to manage that.
Okay. Before we delve into what does it look like and what are the underlying needs, maybe you can first answer what are the logistic outsourcing strategies right now and in the near future.
Yeah, and that was also one of the questions in the survey here, and what you see here, and it links completely together to the aspiration of moving into a more strategic relationship, because it also means that you need to move towards, let's say, less or a few, or maybe even one single provider, instead of working together with many different logistics providers that have specific solutions in specific geographies or specific services. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to bring that to a more strategic level, most likely somebody who's managing your overall supply chain as well, that also means that you need to reduce the number of service providers. And that was a clear outcome here in this survey as well. So both questions link together, of course.
Quite clear. And what does it mean as a services? Well, what are they looking for now and in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, the traditional services like warehouse and transportation, and I think it's not here on in the visual here, but warehouse and transportation, that remain on a very high level of outsourcing. Something like 60% of the attendees, they had outsourced their warehouses, 80-90% had outsourced the transportation. But the shift is in, let's say, the more strategic elements. And also that is a logical conclusion, logical outcome, if you want to go towards a more strategic relationship, that you want to outsource also, let's say, the end-to-end management of your supply chain, or at least the end-to-end supply chain orchestration. And that links very much back to previous discussion with Patrick about the end-to-end solutions. But also order management, supply chain network redesign, those kind of services are increasing in future as well. And that brings a different type of service provider, or at least different capabilities that are needed in the service providers.
And to expect end-to-end supply chain orchestration from your outsourcing partner, your 3PL, 4PL, how do you call it? That means something. Get advice on a strategic level, and that's something quite of a surprise. But what about the satisfaction of these services right now from the brand owners, the shippers?
Yeah, let's say first on, the operational level, and that's where many companies still are at this very moment. Purely on the operational execution, there's a lot of satisfaction about the 3PLs. And of course, there's also companies that are not satisfied yet with their service levels that they get or the cost elements that they have. Mm-hmm. In general, that is at a pretty acceptable level at this moment. Where it becomes more difficult and where there's more dissatisfaction is specifically on, let's say, the newer services that are needed if you're transferring into a more strategic relationship, such as the digitization of your supply chain and the warehouse automation, network optimization. So that's where there's still, at this very moment, doubt and dissatisfaction about the quality of those services. And if you link that together to the previous intent of the brand owners and the shippers to move in that strategic relationship, well, there's still a lot to do, I think, at both ends, in 3PLs, 4PLs, as well as the shippers themselves.
Yeah. When I look at this graph, about the digital supply chain and visibility and the optimization of the network, I'm not surprised. I'm a bit surprised about the warehouse automation. You would expect more from the logistics service providers that they were on top of that, but still, the brand owners, the shippers are not so satisfied on that area.
Yeah, agree. I mean, this is the outcome of the survey, so I cannot change the outcome of the survey. On the other hand, what we do see in let's say our daily business, in when we run RFQs on behalf of shippers in the selection of 3PLs, that there is a significant increase of offerings of automation as well as mechanization by the 3PLs at this very moment. So I think that certainly is on the rise. Capabilities are being developed at the 3PLs. So there's certainly an increase in that from service provider perspective.
Right. Enough said about the satisfaction. Maybe you can tell us more about the gaps, at the LSPs, the logistics service providers.
Yeah. So here the question was indeed about what are the gaps in your business relationship. So also linking that to whether it's a more strategic or a more operational relationship. And well, there are two key winners here, and that's the lack of continuous improvements and the lack of proactive attitude. And I mean that's also a pity, of course, because I mean those are two key elements that you want to have within a service provider. Mm-hmm. If you're working in a strategic partnership. Then you don't want to tell somebody to tell what he needs to do, but you're seeking the intrinsic drive of the 3PLs and the carriers to continuously improve and proactively support the business. So that's an important gap if you put it in the perspective of the aspiration to grow into strategic partnerships.
Yeah, and I compare with a marriage. So with a marriage, you have also to continuously improve and be proactive. Otherwise, you get your wife will be very mad at you. So that's something the 3PLs companies should be aware of. So maybe what are the key challenges according to the survey in that matter?
Yeah. Also here there's one key winner here. That's the IT integration. Links back to also previous discussions with end-to-end supply chain. The key challenge with working with LSP is the IT integration.
Yeah.
And also that is a crucial topic, a crucial element. First of all, in operational relationships, but also in strategic relationships.
And the second one, increasing cost, because maybe that's contradicting to the aspiration or the need of IT integration. IT comes at a cost, but then again, you should gain something out of it.
I mean, increasing cost is something that is, that's something that's alongside all the times, and I think this partially is also driven by the fact that if you look to the cost increases that 3PLs and carriers and warehouse operators needed to pass on to their customers recently because of increased labor and all the disruptions that are in container freight. So then, increasing cost is a topic that will come back all over the time.
Yeah, clear. This is on the part of the logistics service providers. What is it about the brand owners, the shippers, and their gaps?
Yeah, and that's also good to mention. So we've also asked the brand owners to look in the mirror. Where are their own gaps? And I think it's important and fair to mention that there's still also a lot of challenges at the brand owners themselves when they work with the logistics service providers. And also their own maturity of IT solutions. That's a key challenge. And often that is driven by a legacy of multiple ERPs, different setups for the integration with LSPs, non-standardized protocols. So IT and the lack of their own maturity in IT is certainly an important topic here. And well, also the second topic here, the strategic alignment, I think that's also an important one. Yep. I mean, and also linking that to a strategic partnership. I mean, that is the start of a strategic partnership, to understand each other's strategies. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be in 3 or 5 or 10 years? And if you're even not aligned in the company yourselves, how then can you share that information with your partner in order to work on a long-term future strategic partnership? So this is also something where shippers, brand owners need to look at themselves and improve on that.
Yeah, about the strategic alignment, I see a lot of companies, mid-sized to large companies, struggling with the business strategy, aligning it to the supply chain strategies, for one thing. And the third part about the governance, the accountability, that's also a major issue in a lot of companies. Maybe you can tell me a bit more how to get from this transactional to the strategic partnership. What is needed?
Yeah, so indeed, if we take back from the first questions that we talked about, then what does it mean? And 60% of the brand owners, they want to move in the strategic relationship, and it really means that the nature of the relationship that will change, and basically it includes, among others, that let's say objectives will change from short term to more long-term strategic objectives. And the relationship will be based on a total added value, less than looking at purely the price of a specific activity or a transport lane or an individual activity. Solutions will need to be more harmonized and standardized across operations, but also across geographies. And important also, it needs to have something like long-term commitments. A long-term contract is, I would say, also a requirement or a must for a strategic relationship. You need to be able to develop alongside each other. So 5 or maybe even prefer 10 years plus contracts. That's going to be the future then. And important elements, and I think that's a very important one. The relationship in a strategic one will be based more and more on, let's say, confidence and trust. So really, trust is a key element in a strategic relationship as well.
So, quite interesting to mention all this, but a lot of companies, brand owners, manufacturers are outsourcing the logistics, and once every 3 to 5 years they are going back on tendering and that kind of stuff. And that's, well, they need to sharpen them, to benchmark, etc. But maybe you can highlight what should be different if you are looking for a logistics service provider.
Yeah, I think it's basically 3 main elements. So it's on one hand the selection and the tendering for getting a new service provider. The other topic that needs to change is how do you implement such strategic partnership, or where to start, but also how do you manage that long term. And back to that first topic here on how to select a strategic partnership. Where I think the key differences are with, let's say, a more traditional way of procuring or selecting a partner it starts really at the beginning. So defining and aligning on your partner strategy, first of all internally, but also deploying that in your organization. So typically procurement has very different objectives and different targets to achieve than a supply chain manager. So the question could even be, should procurement lead a selection process of a strategic partner? Or should that maybe be the director of supply chain?
Yep.
The candidates are also different, of course. I mean, there are companies that do a perfect job on operational level, but don't have the capability, maybe simply not the strategy or the will to work into strategic partnership. So making a long list and short list of candidates, that's certainly an important topic. And in the process, the test whether there's a match with your own requirements, that is also key, and that's something that you will never get out of a let's say out of a proposal or a costing proposal. So that's where you need to be together, where you need to meet with each other, where you need to meet the different levels in the organization of your future partner, and get the commitment also from senior level. And of course, not to forget, a strategic partnership is based on longer term contracts. So longer term objectives, longer term contracts, it's rather based on a total value of the proposals rather than the individual price elements of a specific activity.
Considering the time, maybe you can briefly go through this implementation steps. Maybe highlight what you think is most important.
Yeah, I mean, just to highlight this, I think the key here is start with something that you can develop in a strategic direction, and start with something where you can be successful and where you can demonstrate the successes in that, without going too much in detail of the individual steps in the implementation here.
If you look at examples, and you have done a lot of work with your customers, both on the brand owners / manufacturing / shipper side, together with LSPs, what are the most important thing if you have a case study like here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a case example indeed of a global online retailer. There's a complex supply chain with 300,000 SKUs in each location, volume peaks of 400% plus, 500,000 orders per site per day. So that's huge, enormous volumes. And if you want to have, let's say, the duplication of those type of sites alongside your geographies that you want to serve, you need to create blueprints. Blueprints of your processes, blueprints of your IT interfacing, blueprints on how you manage eventually, if it's outsourced, your LSP, blueprints of the organization. So I think that's the key, and that's one of the key benefits if you're working in a strategic partnership. If you have those blueprints, you can simply roll that out fast, and it means that you get the benefits. Shorter lead time of the implementation, less disruptions in the ramp up. Finally, in the end, resulting in better service to your end customers.
Yeah, I think the phrase of blueprinting is very important. I think, in a complex world, we talk about the essence and the need for visualization, and blueprinting is also some sort of visualization, or even write it down what to do when.
Sure.
So that's very, very important. To wrap it up, what should be your operations playbook in this matter?
Let's also try to summarize this briefly, looking at time indeed. What is important, and it links to blueprinting, the example that we've just seen in the case with the online retailer. Try to create your operations and your playbook, and so how to manage your logistics, how to manage your service provider, either it be a transactional one or a very strategic one, but take care that everybody is aligned, that you have a vision to that you have the blueprints for the processes, the IT, and very important also take care that you have your own organization that manages your partners. I mean, outsourcing and the success of outsourcing doesn't come from itself. It's really, if you want to make outsourcing to a real success, either it be operational or be more strategic, you really need to manage and you need to drive the success factors on a continuous basis by yourselves as well. So right people, right organization, right talent is key in outsourcing processes as well.
So thanks. So we have a slide about the takeaways about the first part of our survey results. We don't go through it right now, but you can read it afterwards. Same about logistic outsourcing. We are now at the Q&A. We are well out of time actually, but I still want to ask to Patrick and check if there's some other urgent questions. So Patrick, looking at this survey, what is the most surprising result out of this survey?
I think if you look at what's really kind of popping out, I think two elements, if I may point out two, is one is the big gap between the, let's say, the adoption to date versus the aspiration. So the 30% that has it in place versus 70% would like to have it in 2027, which is basically almost a day after tomorrow. So that means that we have homework to do as supply chain practitioners. And the second one is the desire for this hybrid operating model. So making sure that you can leverage, you are in control, you can leverage technology, you can leverage somebody else's process and systems, but you want to kind of make sure that ultimately you can take this back whenever you want. So the outsourcing, the hybrid control tower, that's going to be the desired operating model going forward. So those are the two ones I would call out here.
Yeah, and my observation is, when a partnership, hybrid, you need a partnership. It's like a marriage. You have to work on this from both sides, and you have to be mature about all things on both sides. So that is my takeaway for this. All right, considering we're out of time, but the good news is, we have an extra 30 minutes right after this. So we have an extra 28 minutes right after this. So if you have some further questions to Patrick and Carlo, please join us in the virtual lounge. We will be sitting at table 1, so we can have a direct conversation. A Zoom meeting will pop up, and you have some extra opportunity to ask questions to both of them. Here you have some extra information about what we have published, the consulting subway map. In the middle, you see an article, extensive marketing article, management article about our previous survey about supply chain reshoring, about decentralization and decarbonization. And on the right-hand side, you see a checklist we have created together with the BCI Global last year. So that is being published online. Final thing, there will be 2 deep dive webinars coming up. You see it right here, September 24th on a Tuesday, and October the 10th also on a Thursday. So if you want more and want to have further exploration about the surveys, and also want to listen in to some supply chain experts who've actually participated in the survey, you see the real people talking about their experience about supply chain visibility and logistic outsourcing. So you find it here. You find also the contact details of Patrick and Carlo. So with this, I would like to wrap up. Patrick, thank you for explaining the results for now.
Yep, thanks.
And Carlo, also thank you for your explanation and the exploration of what should be done on both sides.
Thank you.
And to the audience, thank you for listening in. Please join us in the virtual lounge right after this, within a minute. And I hope you liked it. Maybe you watch it, rewatch it in the video recording. The PDF will be made available within 48 hours, so you can read all about it. And we'll be publishing about all this in Supply Chain Movement in one of the upcoming issues. Thanks for now, and I hope to see you later, either in the virtual lounge or next week in another webinar. And that's about WMS. Thank you, and bye-bye.